good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're at, good people. Welcome back to another edition of Tea Time. Yeah, a little time with me, all things public relations and brands. And today I have the most incredible guest. But before I get started and bring her on, I want to let you know this. A lot of what we talk about happens on Twitter. Why, Tanya? Why does it happen on Twitter? You know, I don't like Twitter. Part of our conversation is to get you to like Twitter, because that, if you are really trying to learn the art of public relations, storytelling, and connectivity, relationships, they happen on Twitter. Actually, they happen on Twitter a lot faster than they do most platforms outside of Twitter. So you may have an adverse opinion about it, but we absolutely love it. Love it so much. We started our own little platform on there called PR Lunch Hour, hashtag PR Lunch Hour. You will find us all over that place. And most of the time, aside from my silly jokes, it's solving problems in the public relations, branding, and storytelling world. It's something you just got to learn how to do. You got to learn how to pitch. You got to learn how to tell your story. And I started this to make sure that those that are unfamiliar with how that actually takes place, you can come here, you can ask your questions, and you can hear experts talk about how they do it and how they've been able to be successful. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Miss Michelle Garrett, and she is an amazing PR professional, but even more amazing in writing and crafting stories and crafting editorial that engages people and allows for business owners that hire her to get more leads and more eyeballs on their work. So I don't want to hold you up too long. We're going to bring her in, get right to it. Miss Michelle, how are you?
Hi. Well, it's Monday.
I love it. So why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself? Okay, I'm lying. A lot about yourself and what you do, and why? Because sometimes I think the why kind of gets lost.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have been in PR, communications, marketing, corporate comm, whatever you want to call it, marketing comm, whatever, for a long time. So I kind of fell in love with writing pretty early on. Like I used to sit under a tree, and write poems when I was little and stuff. So I mean, I've always been in love with writing, and so I worked on the high school newspaper. I went to journalism school, and along the way, you have to come up with a concentration within journalism. And for some reason, I can't even remember what got me started on PR. I think I had a professor that I really, really liked, and she was a PR specialist. And so I think that's kind of what inspired me on that front anyway. But yeah, I work with clients as a consultant. I've been on my own for quite a while as well. Before I went out on my own, I worked with startups, big enterprise companies, nonprofits, and I even did an agency stint to kind of get that experience before I went out on my own. And then ever since then, I have been, had my own consulting practice, which is Garrett Public Relations. So
I love it. Now, for the audience to understand, especially those that assume that public relations is a lot of flashy, splashy, I'm connecting you, you're about to be in the media type of thing. Why don't you tell them about your process when you are challenged with getting media coverage for a client?
Well, my process, let's see. So, I mean, first of all, the biggest myth about PR is that it's like Samantha from Sex and the City, right? I mean, it's not like that. It's not like, what's the other one, everybody? There's a couple other ones people talk about all the time, was it Scandal? There was some
Scandal,
there.
yes.
Yeah.
Olivia Pope. You're Olivia Pope.
I did. My other major was poli-sci, but I have never really done. I do volunteer work on campaigns, and that's enough, like, of a taste of that.
Scandal for you, yeah.
But so my process. So really, I mean, the first thing I want to know is, like, what stories do they have to tell? And sometimes they know, and sometimes they don't know. And so I think, we start with like not only what their goals are, like where they want to be seen, like what publications, what media, but then we talk about like what do you have to say, because you could want to be in the Wall Street Journal all day long, but if you don't have something that's of interest to the Wall Street Journal or that audience, you're going to have a hard time. Plus, I think that's just, we use that as an example all the time, but that's just a really high, lofty target. I really try to get clients to think about trades, because vertical trade publications really like contributed articles, and they like product news and things. I work with a lot of clients that are in manufacturing, for example, and they do have products and news that might not be of interest to more mainstream media, but it would be of interest to the trade publications, and that's what their audience is reading. So that's kind of how we start.
So you've been doing this long enough to know
Yeah.
probably where someone should show up, where a good place for them to show up, and then how do you decide that?
Well, I mean, it's sometimes a mix between, it's like a compromise sometimes between, like what they think they want. And I mean, again, we go back to the Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch. I worked with a lot of tech companies, they always want to be in TechCrunch. It's just like, then you have to kind of talk them down from that. But then, you can really say, to help talk them down from that ledge, you could say like, well, where is your audience hanging out? And then you could do research with a tool like SparkToro, for example, to find out like, where is their audience really spending time? It might not be, reading the Wall Street Journal. It might just be an ego thing that the CEO wants to be in the Wall Street Journal. So I'm wondering, like, is that really where you want to be? Is where you think you want to be, is that where you should be?
So you just asked a funny question. Where is your audience at? Michelle, some of these people don't even know who their audience is.
Well, we got to help them figure that out, right? I mean, that's the other thing.
How do you get them to understand who their target audience is?
Well, I love it when they'll just say, oh, we just sell to everybody. Everybody's our customer. I'm like, no, not really, no. And then that's a red flag, right? We're talking about red flags right now. On Twitter. You got a red flag going on that all the way, because it's just like, it's not true. And then the other thing they'll say sometimes is, we don't have any competitors. I'll say, well, who are you watching? Who's the competition? We don't have any. I'm like, everybody has a competitor. If you don't know who your competitor is, the media will come up with that answer for you. So you really want to know that. And then you even want to like map it out, chart it out, like, okay, so our competitor does this and we do this better. And so you at least can answer the questions when they come up. I mean, that's just smart to do that ahead of time.
Speaking of red flags, Michelle, I'm probably one of your biggest red flags. Okay. We do this, tell the audience, let's be honest. We do this PR lunch hour, and I know Michelle's sitting there on the other side of her computer, like, please, Tanya, don't start today. Because when it gets boring in there, I light it up. Now, I do that. Okay. I'm gaslighting. Yes, I am. But the truth of the matter is, brands and those that represent brands and us PR people, we actually have to do that in real life. When your brand is dull and has no luster, you might think it's amazing. Okay. Yeah. We talked about this. People that think their brand is amazing, their company is great, they did this thing and they're the most amazing person in the world and they deserve all the headlines, and they're getting no hits with the pitches, right? Yeah. How do you get them to think outside of the box? Because most of the time they're unilateral in their thinking, and this is what it is. I always say the story behind the story. How do you get them there? Walk me through that process of how you get them there, because they get so stuck on what they think they're so amazing at.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it is like you have to kind of, I always say talk them off the ledge, but what they think is the story may not really be the story. And so there might be something there, but you kind of have to get creative with it a little bit. And I don't mean by that, I don't mean to lie. I mean, I know we have the spin, spin doctor. I don't mean that. I just mean that sometimes you have to ask questions. You have to talk to the right people at the company. It might not be the CEO all the time. It might be somebody who, works and is an engineer, works on the shop floor. Like, there are stories to be told, but you have to figure out what questions to ask, who to talk to. Sometimes it's more than one person, sometimes it's the customer. that's what I think they kind of need help with, because they get, they have tunnel vision because they're in there all day. They're in the trenches. They're just doing their job. And that's why I think somebody from the outside can come in and help, like us, can help them kind of ferret out those stories and those angles. Like sometimes it's just like, it's not even the right, it might be a good story, but it's not the right take on the story. It's not the right angle. And then sometimes even in pitching, you might find out, well, we started out this way, but we were going to try this because we think it might be a little bit more effective. And I don't think you should be afraid to do that.
One of the things I love about you most is you have such a big heart and an eye for empathy. I was having a conversation last week about people in PR, in marketing and whatnot. You can't really tell a good story if you have no ability to empathize with the other side. Where did you get that from?
Well, that's a very kind thing for you to say. I mean, I do try to put that at the top of everything that I do because I'm a feeler. On the Myers-Briggs test, I am a huge F. I'm a big feeler, right? So, I mean, I get my feelings hurt, or I can get my feelings hurt. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm overly sensitive, but I mean, I'm sensitive to people's feelings because I am a feeler. And so I lead with that a lot of times. I'm like, well, how will this person feel if I say or do this thing? Like, and I mean, obviously it doesn't always happen that way, but I mean, I do try to do that.
You have this really cool thing going on Twitter. Okay. I just probably started stalking you through this at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Before Freelance Chat. There are people in that group that aren't necessarily in public relations. They could be in marketing. They could be, writing. So many different things that people do, and they freelance at it. How did you start this group, and what have you learned most about leading a group of people that are from different areas, different genres of business, but all trying to do the same thing? Well, succeed and help others.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have freelanced for a long time. And when I started, I was out in the Bay Area, and I belonged to a group of freelancers through a professional organization that I was in. And it was super helpful. I mean, I found my first client that way. I found somebody to help me set up my billing and my administrative processes that way, my consulting agreement. I mean, I had everything I needed on day one. And a lot of that was due to that group. And so when I moved back to the Midwest, I didn't have anything like that. And I tried to start it in person through Meetup. And that went on for, I don't know, year and a half. And it just kind of dwindled down. And it was never exactly what I wanted. So I had been attending Twitter chats. And of course, huge fan of Twitter. And so I thought, I'm going to try a Twitter chat and see how it works. And I kind of put a poll out to see how many people would come if I started one, and there was some interest. And I kind of had people agree, like a small subset of folks agree to be there for the first, couple months anyway, because, it's very lonely when you're on Twitter and you're just talking to yourself, so we started, and it's 3 years old now, and it is open to anybody. It's not just, I do have some people that think it's just for PR freelancers, but no, it's really for any freelancer, anybody that's self-employed, consulting, anybody like that.
Listen, y'all, I have heard them talk about taxes, how freelancers should be doing their taxes.
Yep.
Billing, how you deal with difficult clients. Process, databases.
Talk about marketing. We talk about pricing.
And
we're going to talk about packaging, like how to package up your services, what kind of services you should sell and who wants those, and what, how it works for you and the client and that kind of thing. So
it makes a difference to have a supportive community around the things that you are trying to do. And you don't have to be in the same industry when it comes to problem solving. Yes, it's problem solving for you, but there are people out there with answers. But, as my mama would say, a closed mouth don't get fed. So if you don't show up and you don't ask the right questions, you can't get no answers. And I think it sucks to be out in the world just trying to figure out everything on your own, because there are people with answers. So save some time and money, because messing up costs money. And, step in sometimes. And you don't always have to respond. If you want to just come in and listen or read, you can do that. So I definitely suggest, if there's anything about running your own business that you're struggling with, freelance chat, hashtag freelance chat.
Right.
Place. And the thing is, you can also go and just search it and see some of the conversations that have already been had. I think it's just an incredible opportunity to learn some things. Like I said, I've learned, I just step in, I just be all in the middle of the conversation sometimes and just chat it up. And that's what it's called, freelance chat.
Yeah.
You do several things. We've talked about this before, but PR professionals usually have something else that they do very well. Again, yours is writing. You've always had this skill coming in, but talk to people about why good writing is so important for PR professionals or those that are just trying to pitch themselves.
Well, I mean, I feel like unclear writing is, it takes you away from the message. So right away, if you are trying to make sense of something, somebody sent you an email or a social media post or a blog post or an article or whatever, if it's poorly written or not clearly written, it's automatically people are tending to just leave, because there's so much content and there's so much going on, and people just don't have time and patience to try to figure out what you were trying to say, right? And so it's very important not only to get to the point, but also to say it clearly. And then I always try to lead with the most important information, just like in a press release, and then kind of support it and add a link where they could go to get more or whatever. But I always feel like you've got to kind of draw them in with a good headline, or something that the first couple paragraphs that are really compelling, and so they want to read on, they want to read more.
Press releases are old school, true or false?
The first blog post I ever wrote for PR Daily was about the so-called death of the press release, because I just got so upset about it. I got so upset. I'm like, it's not dead. It's not dead. I have reporters ask me for press releases. It's like, where's the press release? So I'm not saying you always need a press release to pitch a story. And I definitely don't try to sell a client a press release if they don't need it, but I feel like it is important in a lot of ways, because it also helps kind of get the clients on the same page. So if you've got the guy in marketing and the guy in the C-suite and the sales guy, so they're all trying, if everybody weighs in on the messaging, then everybody's going to be singing from the same songbook. And that's good, because now we all know this is how we're talking about this, and this is the most important thing, or two or three things that we want people to remember when we release this news.
Doing your own PR as a PR professional is super easy because you're good at it. True or false?
I thought you were saying that like a fact, and I was like,
Gotcha.
I don't disagree with her, but
gotcha. True or false?
People, no, it's false. It's
what?
not easy.
No, of course it's false.
Yeah. It's false, because a lot of people, and even people in PR, don't like to talk about themselves. This is a Midwest thing too, I find, because out on the West Coast, nobody ever was like, yeah, I'm no big deal. Out there, everybody thought they were a big deal, right? So like tech bro culture and whatnot. So that's where I came up, on my own, with my own business anyway. That's where I cut my teeth, is out there. So I'm like, well, here in the Midwest, people, especially women, you can't, you got to talk about yourself a little bit. Now, I know some people are not comfortable and it can come off the wrong way, but I really think you have to kind of, if you're not talking about yourself, you can't expect other people to know what you're doing. And it just makes sense to me, but I know some people are not comfortable with it.
You have to have over 10,000 followers to get good press. True or false?
False. How do we talk about that one? I mean, I see companies, the thing that I don't think is good is sometimes I see a startup, for example, in the news. So I'll immediately go to their social media, and they don't have a Twitter account at all, or they haven't posted in 2 years or whatever. I'm like, oh, well, that's not good. So I do think you don't have to have all the followers, but you should be active. And I'm not saying you have to be active on Twitter. For B2B clients, which is primarily what I work with, I do recommend LinkedIn and Twitter. but I do have B2B clients that are also on Instagram, also on Facebook. So I mean, I think don't try to do 20 social media platforms, but pick maybe 2 and try to really do those really well.
If I don't have a whole lot of time to wait on this whole PR process y'all keep talking about, I can just pay to have a story about me in a magazine I want to show up in. True or false?
Well, it is true, but the question might be, do you want to do that? Is that something you want to do? I don't know.
Of course. I just want to be in the magazine, Michelle.
Well, and I mean, and you know what? Sometimes I've worked with clients who say, yeah, okay, we want to be in Forbes, so we're just going to pay to be in Forbes. But that's not all we're going to do, but we're okay with that. I just feel like once people get on to, get wise to the fact that you paid for it, because at some point they're going to see it's sponsored or then it's just not as credible. It's not like saying, oh yeah, Forbes covered us because we were newsworthy. It's like, oh yeah, I paid them $3,000, so I'm in Forbes.
So what's important to know about that is if you're paying for it, it's an ad. Or if it's an ad with a lot of words, which looks like an article, it's really you just telling the world what you think about yourself. That's an ad or advertorial. It's like editorial that you paid for. Sponsored. Yep. It is not PR. So you need to know the difference when you get these things in your inbox, because people will send them to you. And for those that are not familiar with what PR actually is, that's what it isn't. Matter of fact, Michelle, PR and marketing are the same thing. True or false?
No.
Of course they are.
Another false one there.
Oh my God.
I should have had a glass of wine for this now.
I tried to tell you. Listen.
I should have.
I'm just saying it makes sense to have a conversation about some of these things that people really struggle with.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to deviate if you're not familiar with the environment. And we are, but most of them are not. So even when we get hired, they still don't really know what they pay for, no matter how many times we explain it. So that is absolutely why I wanted to have a platform where people can come and just ask their questions and get answers that will help them. And here's the last one before I let you go. What is your best advice to someone that is trying to, because they can't afford you, DIY their PR?
Oh, well, I think sometimes if you start small, even it can snowball. There can be momentum built even with a small opportunity. I know people who will say, oh, I don't do any work for free, so I'm not going to answer this request from a blogger to be, quoted in their article or whatever. I mean, and to me, that's a mistake a little bit. I mean, like if you're going to spend hours and hours of time on something, sure, then maybe not. But if you're just going to send them a quote or something for their article, or, there's an opportunity to do that, I would say take that, because that's how a lot of people get started. They could maybe be a guest on a podcast. They could do something, small, and then maybe somebody else will hear it or see it. And then other people will ask them to participate as well. And it really just builds up over time. Anybody that's, out there a lot, it didn't happen overnight. Usually it's really a process that's taken time, and they've been generous with their time and they're sharing what they know. And if they're asked to share their knowledge in some way, I think you should, kind of share what you know. I think that really helps.
I love that. Well, listen, I always say, if you're going to try to do it yourself and you have to pitch yourself, just be able to answer this question. Who are you and why should I care? You need to let the audience know, the reader know, the journalist know, why should they care? How are you affecting other people's quality of life? How are you going to make someone's business life better? What's this new tool that you are developing, and why should they care? If you're able to answer that and you don't need me or Michelle to answer for you, you're going to be all right. So thank you so much. Please let the people know how they can keep up with you, get in touch with you, and maybe get some free answers.
Oh, yeah. Well, I do give out a lot of tips on
She Twitter. Really does.
I'm on Twitter all the time, right? Too much, right? And I do try to take breaks from Twitter just for a few hours though. I'm always every day I probably am on Twitter, but yeah, so Twitter, it's at PR is us. That's just like it sounds. And then what else? Oh, my website is michellegarrett.com. I'm on Lunch Hour, PR Lunch Hour, every Friday at noon with you and Tam. And yeah, I don't know. Other probably other places as well.
If you look for her, you'll find her. She's pretty consistent. And if nothing else, you can Google her. Yes, you can, because she's that dope. So take some time, figure it out. If you can't figure it out, you have people here to help you figure it out. And I guess we'll see you guys back here next week. Same bat channel, same bat time, right here on LinkedIn. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Tanya.